A 7-year-old child walked into courtroom alone. No lawyer, no family, only one purpose: to save his father from a crime he did not commit. What he said next made the entire courtroom silent. Everyone thought the father was guilty. The evidence was against him. Hope was gone. But then his 7-year-old son stood up and spoke. And in that moment, the truth began to tear the walls of power apart. Imagine a child, too young to understand the world, yet strong enough to challenge it. He did not come to cry. He came to fight. And his words changed everything. They tried to silence the truth. They tried to remove every witness. But they forgot one thing: a child's love. And that love became the loudest voice in the courtroom. A courtroom, a father in chains, a child standing alone. No one believed him. But when he opened his mouth, even the judge could feel his heart break. Rows of wooden benches stretched beneath high windows where gray light filtered in. Adults whispered in low, uncertain tones, their eyes shifting toward the small figure seated in the front row. He was only 7 years old, a boy with dark hair that fell slightly over his eyes, wearing a neatly ironed shirt that was a little too big for him. His feet did not reach the floor. They hung, quietly swinging above polished tiles. His father stood to the side with bound wrists. He avoided his son's gaze, not from shame alone, but from a heavy fear that sat in his chest like a stone. Everyone in the courtroom believed they already knew the truth. Everyone except the child. The judge finally spoke, his voice deep and steady. "Do you understand why you are here today?" The boy looked up. He did not tremble. His small hands rested on his knees, and his eyes held a calm that was far beyond his years. "I came because no one else will speak for my father," he said. His voice was gentle, but every syllable landed with unmistakable clarity. People shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward. The prosecutor approached with careful steps, as if uncertain how to confront someone so young. "You say your father is innocent. On what ground do you make this claim?" The boy blinked slowly, remembering. His memories were not in the form of words at first, but of scenes. The sound of his father rising before dawn. The smell of metal and oil from the workshop. Warm hands carrying him to bed when he fell asleep on the floor. He raised his head and spoke with unwavering sincerity. "My father taught me that when someone falls, you help them stand. He taught me that if you make a promise, you must keep it, even if your hands shake. He taught me that kindness is not something you show only when others are watching. That is who my father is." A hush fell across the room. Even the ticking clock seemed to soften. The prosecutor tried to regain ground. "That does not change the evidence against him." The boy turned slowly, finally looking at his father. His eyes were full not of tears, but of something older, something unbroken. He faced the courtroom again. "Evidence can show what happened," he said, "but it cannot show why. And it cannot show who a person truly is when no one is looking." Somewhere in the back, someone exhaled sharply. A woman lowered her face into her hands. The judge leaned forward. His expression, once stern and unreadable, had softened, but he said nothing yet. The room waited, suspended in a silence that fell on the edge of something enormous. The boy continued, "I am 7 years old. I do not know all the rules adults speak about, but I know my father. I know his heart. I am asking you to see him the way I see him, not as someone you are told he is, but as the person he has always been." The boy's voice did not rise. He did not plead. He simply offered truth, the only way he understood it, with absolute purity. A tear rolled down the father's cheek. He lowered his head. The judge opened his mouth to speak. And at that precise moment, the courtroom door creaked open. Footsteps echoed. A new figure entered. Someone who had not been expected to appear. Someone whose presence cast a new shadow across the case. The boy turned, eyes widening just slightly. The father straightened, breath caught in his chest. The judge paused, waiting to hear what would come next. The entire courtroom held its breath as the story took an unforeseen and profound turn. The doors closed behind a new arrival with a heavy thud that echoed across the silent room. A woman stepped forward, her footsteps measured, her posture poised yet trembling at the edges. She was dressed simply, her hair tied back, her eyes carrying the weight of years unspoken. Some in the room recognized her. Others only sensed that her presence mattered. Deeply, the father's shoulders tensed. He did not blink. He had lived many days prepared for pain, but not for this. The boy watched her as one would watch a changing sky, unsure if a storm was coming or if the light had finally returned. The judge cleared his throat gently. "State your name." The woman stopped before the bench. "My name is Saren." A ripple passed through the courtroom. That name had been printed in the case file more than once. Mentioned, but always followed by the same footnote. Unable to be located. She looked at the father first. Her eyes softened, but her breath caught, as though something fragile inside her might break if she exhaled too quickly. Then she turned to the child. Her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. "I am here to speak the truth." The prosecutor stepped forward with renewed urgency. "You were listed as a primary witness, yet you disappeared. The court has been searching for you." Saren lowered her gaze. "I know." The judge nodded slowly. "Then tell us why you come now." Silence stretched between them like a narrow bridge no one wished to cross. The boy's fingers tightened around the edges of his shirt. His father remained completely still, barely breathing. Saren lifted her chin, and her voice grew steadier. Because a child should never have to stand alone to defend the soul of the only person who has ever protected him. The atmosphere shifted, not dramatically, but deeply, like the air before a thunderstorm when every leaf holds still. People leaned forward without realizing. The story that had lived only in documents and accusations was no longer a set of facts. It was becoming human, raw, undeniable. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge raised his hand. "Let her speak." Saren's fingers intertwined, knuckles pale. She took a slow breath. "The night they say he committed the crime, I was there." Every seat creaked as bodies reacted in instinctive shock. The boy's heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. The father closed his eyes. But Saren was not done. The truth of that night is not what has been told. And what happened did not begin there. It began long before, with debts, with threats, with promises that were broken by others, not by him. The prosecutor stepped forward. "These are claims without proof. Do you have evidence?" Saren turned her head slowly, her expression calm, almost too calm. "I did not come here with paper. I came here with the truth. And the truth is already known by someone who has not yet spoken in this courtroom." The judge leaned in. "Who?" Saren looked past the prosecutor, past the jurors, past the spectators. Her gaze landed on someone near the back bench. A man who had been silent since the beginning. A man who had come early and taken a seat where no one would notice him. A man who now stiffened, his jaw tightening, as if caught beneath a spotlight no one had expected to shine. His hands, until then relaxed, slowly curled into fists. The boy followed Saren's gaze and saw him too. A stranger, yet not entirely. His father recognized him. His breath stopped. The courtroom air seemed to thicken, as though the walls themselves understood what was being revealed. Everyone sensed the moment before it fully arrived. The moment when truth stands on the threshold, just before it steps forward and changes everything that came before. The judge addressed the man directly. "Sir, would you stand?" All eyes turned. But the man did not move. Not at first. He only looked at the child, at the father in chains, at Saren, who waited with steady eyes. Then, slowly, he began to rise. The room held its breath. What he would say next would determine everything. The fate of the father, the meaning of the child's courage, the story that would be told afterward. But at the exact moment, he opened his mouth. The clock struck, a sharp, ringing note that cut through the tension like a blade, and the judge lifted a hand. "We will recess." The courtroom gasped in unison. A dozen emotions collided in the air. Shock, relief, dread, hope. The man who had begun to rise froze. The father closed his eyes as though struck. The child stared at the judge, his expression unreadable. Saren stepped back, her heartbeat quickening, but her posture remained firm. The guards approached the father. The moment was broken. suspended, left hanging in the space between truth and revelation. The doors opened. People rose. Whispers swelled. Yet the answer, the words everyone needed, remained unspoken. Not yet. Not now. Not while the child still sat with his feet not touching the ground. The father was escorted back to the side door, his wrists still bound, the chain faintly rattling as he walked. He did not look at anyone now, not even the boy. But his jaw was tight, and his chest rose with a breath that held too much inside to release. The child remained seated for a long moment after the judge left the bench. He did not move. He did not cry. His small shoes hovered above the ground just as they had before, but something in him had changed, something that made the space around him feel heavier. Saren stepped closer, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "You were very brave." The boy did not answer. His fingers traced the wooden edge of the bench, slow and thoughtful. "Brave," he whispered. "Does not feel like anything." Saren lowered her eyes. She understood. Across the room, the man who had begun to stand before the recess remained frozen in place. He had not left with the others. He sat now at the very edge of his seat, elbows on his knees, both hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles blanched white. He had tried to remain invisible. That was no longer possible. A courtroom attendant approached him. "Sir, you must step outside with the others while the recess is in effect." The man lifted his head. His eyes were tired, not the tiredness of lost sleep, but of years running from the same moment that now sat before him. "I will leave in a moment," he replied, voice steady. The attendant hesitated. There was something about him that suggested this request should not be pressed too quickly. Outside in the corridor, the father waited under the watch of officers. He stood with his back against the wall, breathing through the conflict that roared quietly beneath his ribs. He had prepared himself for judgment. He had not prepared himself for hope. Hope was far more dangerous. Inside the courtroom, the boy finally slid down from the bench. His feet touched the floor. Saren placed a hand on his shoulder, light and uncertain. The boy looked toward the back of the room where the man sat. Their eyes met. The boy did not know who he was. Not by name, not by role, but something in that man's stare felt familiar, as if a piece of the night no one spoke of was hidden there. Saren followed the boy's gaze and understood exactly whom he was looking at. She inhaled slowly. She did not speak his name. Not yet. The man stood. The simple act of rising from his seat seemed to fill the entire room. A quiet shift, a wait, the kind of moment that is not loud but leaves the air altered forever. He approached the child with measured steps, each one deliberate. The courtroom attendant watched nervously, ready to intervene if needed, but the boy stood still, strangely calm, as though he already understood that fear did not belong here. The man stopped a few steps away. He crouched down, so his eyes were level with the boy's. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at one another. No one else spoke. No one breathed. The man's voice, when it came, was almost a whisper, but it carried with clarity that filled the silence. "You should not have had to speak today. You are only 7. The boy blinked slowly. "I am the one who had to." A small tremor passed through the man's jaw. His hands remained tightly clasped. Saren watched the man carefully, her eyes steady, her posture still. She knew exactly what he was deciding in this moment, whether to keep running from the truth that had chased him for so long, or to face it. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. The recess time was ending. People began returning. Whispers filled the corridors again, moving closer. The judge would return soon. The father would be brought back. The trial would resume. The man straightened slowly. His decision was forming, layer by layer, breath by breath. Saren looked at him, waiting. The boy watched him, unafraid. The courtroom doors opened once more. And just as the man drew in a breath to finally speak the truth he had carried for so long, a voice from behind interrupted sharply. "Do not say another word." The command struck like a blade. Everyone turned. A new figure had entered. Someone who had not been expected. Someone whose presence shifted the entire direction of what was about to unfold. The man's expression changed. The boy's heart tightened. Saren's eyes widened just slightly. The judge's return was moments away, and whatever would happen next was poised on the very edge of revelation. The voice cut through the room with the force of something sharp and long before it was ever spoken. A tall man in a dark suit stepped into the light, his presence controlled, composed, and deeply unsettling in its precision. His eyes did not move to the child, not to Saren, not to the father waiting outside the chamber. He looked only at the man who had been about to speak. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy, charged with history. The boy did not yet understand. Saren's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the bench. She knew him, not by name, but by the way tension traveled through the shoulders of the man she had hoped would speak. This was someone who held power over the truth. The boy sensed something shift, a quiet danger, not the loud kind that bursts and storms, but the kind that arrives in a whisper and changes the air. The suited man stepped forward, each footfall exact and steady. Every gesture suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You will not testify," he said. His voice was calm, not loud, but final. The man who had been preparing to speak lowered his eyes. For a moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath again. He looked at the boy, then at Saren, and something inside him, something long buried, shuddered. Saren spoke first, her voice quietly firm, though her chest rose with restrained urgency. "You have no authority to stop him." The suited man turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence with the smallest movement. No emotion, no surprise, only calculation. "I have more than authority," he replied. "I have consequence." A murmur passed through the few who had returned to their seats early. Even they understood this was not simply a legal matter anymore. The boy watched all of this with stillness that did not belong to a child. He had learned silence not as obedience, but as listening. The suited man looked down at him then, just briefly. "Children should not be in courtrooms," he said. The boy lifted his chin slowly. "Then why do I need to be—" The man paused. A small pause, barely seen, but real. Saren looked at the child, his voice clearer now, steadier, stronger than before. The strength of someone whose world had been stripped down to one truth: protect the one who protected you. The suited man straightened his tie. "You need to step outside," he directed toward the boy. The boy did not move. "May I ask you something first?" the boy said, his voice level. The suited man did not answer, but he did not walk away either. The boy continued, "If you know the truth, why are you afraid of it being spoken?" Another ripple moved across the room, soft but unmistakable. Even those who did not understand the full story understood the weight of the question. The suited man's jaw tightened, not visibly, but in the way an old wound remembers pain. Before he could answer, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened again. The guards brought the father back in. His chains clinked softly, but the sound landed like thunder in the tense room. His eyes swept the space, and in an instant he read it all. The presence of the suited man. The silent man he once called brother. Saren's unwavering stance. His son standing strong in the center of it. The father's breath left him as though something invisible had struck his chest. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew what it meant. The suited man turned to face him, expression unchanging. "We are resuming." The judge was already stepping back toward the bench, notes in hand, unaware of the storm gathering before him. The man who had nearly spoken stood frozen between two worlds, the one where he kept his silence, and the one where he finally told the truth. The judge raised his gavel, and the courtroom once again fell into absolute stillness. The boy's heart beat once. Saren steadied her breath. The father locked his eyes on the man who knew everything. The suited man watched, waiting to see if fear would win. The judge opened his mouth to call the court back into session. And just then, the courtroom door at the far side clicked open again. Someone else had arrived. Someone no one expected. Someone whose voice, if spoken aloud, would unravel everything from the very first accusation. The room turned, and the story did not end yet. The door at the far end of the courtroom opened with a soft, unhurried sound. No one spoke. No one even moved. A woman entered. carrying a small leather folder held close to her chest. She was older than Saren, her hair streaked lightly with gray, her posture upright but weary. She did not look toward the judge, the lawyers, or the spectators. Her eyes went straight to the father, and the father's expression changed in a way no chain could hide. Recognition, pain, hope he did not want to believe in. The boy's breath caught in his throat, but he did not look away. He could feel the air shift again, like a curtain lifting to reveal another layer no one knew was there. Saren exhaled very slowly. She knew this woman, not personally, not by name, but by the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had held silence for too long. The suited man's jaw locked more visibly now. He knew her too. The judge, still standing, took a moment to register the new presence. "And you are—" The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward until she stood in the very center of the room. She placed a leather folder carefully on the prosecution table, hands steady despite the tremor in her voice when she finally spoke. "My name is Molly." The man who had tried to speak earlier shut his eyes. Saren closed hers. The father's hands clenched into fists, because Molly was the one person missing in every testimony. The name that had appeared only once in the case file, attached to a single incomplete statement. A statement that never reached the court. A statement that had been withdrawn without explanation. The boy looked at the woman named Molly. She seemed tired in a way that reached down to bones. But her eyes were clear. The suited man took one step toward her. "You had your opportunity to testify. Your statement was formally withdrawn. Your presence is irrelevant." Molly turned to face him fully. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I was threatened into silence. The room reacted not with noise, but with a sudden, heavy stillness. The kind that comes when truth strikes something raw. The suited man did not blink. Allegations without proof are meaningless. Molly rested her hand on the folder. "Proof is exactly what I have brought." The boy watched the folder as though it were a living thing, something filled with consequences and answers. The judge leaned forward. "What is contained in that folder?" Molly slowly opened the latches. The sound was soft, but it carried across the courtroom like a bell. Inside were documents, photographs, printed statements, a sealed envelope with an official crest, and one more item, a small, worn notebook, edges frayed, as if it had been handled too many times by hands that shook. The suited man spoke again, sharper now. "The court does not need dramatics. This is a matter of factual. These are the records of the payments," Molly interrupted, "made to ensure that an innocent man would be blamed, made by the ones who now sit in this very room." Every eye shifted, but she was not done. "And this," she said, resting her fingers on the small notebook, "is the diary of the person who orchestrated everything." The suited man took another step forward. His voice, still controlled, now carried urgency. "You are making a mistake." Molly finally looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "I have lived with this mistake for 3 years. I will not continue." The boy's father lowered his head. His shoulders trembled, not from weakness, but from something breaking open inside him. The man who had nearly spoken earlier looked at the boy now, not ashamed, but changed. He was no longer the man who sat in silence. The judge lifted his hand. "Bring the folder to the bench." Molly took a breath and began to step forward. The suited man moved at the same time, not quickly, but with the certainty of someone who did not intend to lose. And at that exact moment, the overhead lights flickered. Once, then again, a subtle, dim flicker that passed like a shiver across every wall. The judge paused. Molly froze. Saren looked toward the ceiling. The guards tightened their stance. The boy turned slowly toward the back of the courtroom, because the flicker was not electrical, not accidental. It felt like a signal. The suited man's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The father exhaled, long and quiet. Outside, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Heavy, rhythmic, moving closer. The door handle began to turn. Everyone in the courtroom knew, when that door opened, The direction of the truth would change again, and no one could predict which way it would fall. The door opened slowly, not with force, but with an unsettling calm that seemed intentional. A uniformed officer entered first. Behind him walked a man in civilian clothing, holding a sealed briefcase in both hands. He did not look left or right. He simply walked in front of the courtroom and stopped 5 steps from the judge's bench. The judge narrowed his eyes. "State your purpose." The man stood still for a moment, as if grounding himself in what he was about to do. Then he spoke. "I am here to submit additional evidence to court. Order for release under special authorization." The room reacted instantly, not loudly, but deeply. The suited man's expression did not break, but the stillness in his posture became sharper, more rigid. He knew what this meant, or at least, he believed he did. The officer stepped forward and handed a document to the judge. The judge read silently, his brow tightening, his jaw shifting as though each line carried more weight than the one before. When he finished, he set the paper down slowly. "Bring the briefcase forward." The civilian obeyed. He placed the case on the bench. The metallic locks glinted beneath the courtroom's pale lights. The judge looked up. "This authorization is verified." Molly lowered her gaze, her hands clasped, her breath held. Saren's eyes followed every movement. The boy stood completely still. The father, though still bound, lifted his head just enough to see. The judge opened the briefcase. Inside were files. Not rumors, not testimonies, not speculation. Official documents, original signatures, undeniable trails, the kind that do not rely on memory or interpretation, the kind that decide outcomes. The courtroom remained silent. Even the air seemed to pause. The judge did not speak yet. He scanned page after page, his expression unreadable. Saren watched the suited man now. She watched the way his fingers curled slightly against his sides, the way his breathing slowed to an exact pace, the way his gaze had stopped shifting. He was not reacting. He was calculating. The boy stepped closer to his father, not touching, just close enough that their presence acknowledged each other. The father felt it. He drew in a shallow breath that held more emotion than any spoken word could express. The man who had nearly spoken earlier looked at Molly, then at Saren, then at the boy. His shoulders squared. A choice was forming inside him, not forced, chosen. The judge finally set the papers down. But before he could speak, a voice rose from the back row, weak, trembling, uncertain, yet carrying the weight of someone who had held silence far too long. "Your Honor." Everyone turned. It was an elderly man, thin, hands shaking slightly as he held on to the back of the bench in front of him. His eyes were watery, but not from age alone. He looked directly at the father. "I know why he is here," the old man said, "and I know who made sure of it." The suited man turned, slowly, cold, measuring. The elderly man's voice steadied, as if he had been waiting years for the chance to speak these words. "I worked at the warehouse the night it happened. I saw who was there. I saw what really occurred. I was told to stay quiet, to disappear, to let the blame fall where they wanted it to fall." His voice broke, but only for a moment. He continued, "I did not speak then. I was afraid. I am ashamed of that fear every day." The boy listened with a stillness that resembled something ancient. He understood something in the old man's voice that did not need to be explained. Truth does not always shout. Sometimes it arrives tired, but it arrives. The elderly man looked at the judge now. "I am ready to tell everything." A hush settled again. No one moved, not even the suited man. But the suited man's silence now was different. Not calm, not composed. He was waiting for something. The judge looked toward the guards. "Bring a chair for the witness." But the guard nearest the door did not move. He was listening to something outside the courtroom. Footsteps, many, not rushed, not panicked, approaching. The judge paused. The courtroom turned toward the door again. The boy felt the air shift once more. Stronger this time, like wind before the arrival of the storm that had waited too long at the horizon. Just as the guards reached to open the door, a single knock sounded, not loud, but final, a knock that carried the weight of someone who did not come to ask. They came to change everything. The handle turned, the door began to open, and the truth, with all of its consequences, stood just beyond the threshold, waiting to enter. The door opened slowly, and the room's tension pulled tighter, like a wire drawn to its limit. A figure stepped inside. Not hurried, not hesitant, certain. It was a woman in her late 40s, wearing a long coat, still carrying raindrops across the shoulders. Her expression was calm, but not cold. She walked with the quiet gravity of someone who had lived through too much and learned to speak only when words mattered. No one recognized her at first. Not the judge, not the audience, not even the suited man, until she lifted her eyes and looked directly at him. Something shifted inside his gaze, sharp, involuntary, unmasked. Recognition. The woman removed her coat and folded it neatly over her arm, as if she were not standing in the middle of a storm of consequences. Her composure was the kind that came from wounds that had already scarred over. She did not approach the judge. She did not go to Molly. She did not go to the boy or his father. She walked toward the suited man. Step by step by step. The court watched, breath held. The suited man did not speak. But for the first time, his posture was no longer controlled. His shoulders were stiffer. His jaw held too tight. The woman stopped in front of him, just close enough that the distance between them carried a history no one yet understood. "You should have known I would come," she said softly. The suited man answered without turning his head. "I expected many things. Not this." Her gaze flickered downward for a brief moment, as if acknowledging a memory before letting it settle. "You always expect outcomes," she replied, "but you never expect remorse." Saren's eyes widened just slightly, because that tone, that familiarity, was not legal, not business, not forced. It was personal. The boy watched their faces, his young mind recognizing something beneath the surface, though he did not yet have the words for it. The father stared at the woman now, and his own breath changed. A quiet recognition, a shock softened by understanding. The judge finally spoke. "Identify yourself." The woman did not look away from the suited man as she answered, "My name is Chantera." A ripple went through the room. The father closed his eyes. Saren's lips parted in silent realization. Molly placed her hand flat on the bench to steady herself. The boy looked up at his father, searching for meaning in the expression that had overcome him. The suited man finally spoke, though his voice was lower now. "You were not supposed to return." Chantera shook her head gently. "I was not supposed to survive." The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of truth approaching a door. Saren stepped forward slowly. "Chantera," she said, her voice steady, "you were there, were you not?" Chantara's eyes drifted toward her, not evasive, simply heavy. "Yes." The old man who had risen earlier swallowed hard. He knew her too, not by face, by story. Chantera turned then, not to the judge, not to the lawyers, but to the boy, and something in her gaze softened. "You should not have had to carry this," she said to him. Her voice was warm, worn, grave. "None of this was ever meant for you." The boy's throat tightened, but he held her gaze, unflinching. "Then speak," he said quietly. Her eyes shone, though no tears fell. The judge exhaled slowly. "This court is now reconvened. If you have a testimony, it will be heard in full." But Chantera did not step toward the stand. Not yet. She looked once more at the suited man. "The truth does not require permission," she said. The suited man's expression hardened. But there was something else there now. Not fear, not defeat. Recognition of the moment he could no longer control. The judge lifted his pen. Molly held the folder to her chest. The elderly man sat, hands trembling but ready. The father's chains seemed to weigh less. The boy stood in the center of it all, small but unbroken. Chantera inhaled, and the courtroom stilled again. She opened her mouth to speak, and at that exact moment, the lights overhead dimmed, not flickering, dimming, as if the building itself was bracing. A soft hum filled the air. barely audible, but felt. The judge paused. Saren turned her head. The suited man did not move. The boy felt the hair rise on his arms. Something was happening. Not outside, not behind them. Here, inside the walls of the courtroom. And Chantara, who had returned from silence, looked upward, her expression changing in a way no one could interpret yet. The words she had been about to speak remained unspoken, held for one heartbeat longer, suspended, right before everything finally broke open. Final episode, The Truth Speaks. The light steadied again, though the stillness in the room felt different now, as if every person inside understood, without needing to be told, that this was the moment everything had been leading toward. Chantara drew in a slow breath, not to gather courage, but to release the weight she had carried for too long. She stepped forward and faced the judge. "I will tell the truth," she said, "not to accuse, not to destroy, but because a child came here alone to defend his father, and that is something no adult in this story should have ever allowed." The judge nodded once, solemnly. "Proceed." Chantara turned slightly, so that her words reached everyone at once. 3 years ago, the warehouse fire was no accident. It was planned to erase evidence of the bribery ring that had been operating inside. Your officers found my bracelet at the scene, my blood, my clothes, so they believed I was gone, that I had perished in the flames. The old man bowed his head, guilt etched into every line of his face. "The man you have accused," Chantara continued, her voice steady, "was the one who pulled me from the building when no one else tried. He shielded me with his own body. He carried me through the smoke. He nearly lost his life to save mine." The father closed his eyes. He remembered, not with pride, but with quiet grief. Chantara turned toward the suited man. "And I know why I was targeted. I know who issued the order. I know who benefited from the lie. You did." The suited man did not look away. He had built walls around himself long ago, but walls, once cracked, fall quietly. He said nothing. Chantara looked at Molly then. "I disappeared because I was told the boy would be harmed if I spoke. So I hid. I lived with silence as my punishment. But today, he is here, standing, facing what we could not." The boy did not shift his stance. He simply listened, as he had always done. Chantara's voice softened, and I knew the moment I saw him that I could no longer remain silent. The judge spoke then. "Submit your statement. The court will enter it into the record." Chantara placed her written testimony in the center of the bench. Molly placed her folder beside it. The elderly man whispered that he, too, would stand and speak. One by one, the pieces of truth aligned. No raised voices. No chaos. Only quiet clarity. The suited man lowered his gaze. For the first time, he looked like someone who understood that consequences were no longer avoidable. The guard stepped toward him. He did not resist. The father breathed out, long and unsteady, as though that breath had waited years to be released. The boy walked to him. His small hand reached forward. The father lowered his head to meet him, their foreheads touching in a silent acknowledgement stronger than any spoken apology or explanation could ever be. Saren watched quietly, hands clasped, her eyes gentle. The judge closed the file and spoke with the weight of final judgment. "This court will move forward to exoneration proceedings. The truth will be recognized, and justice, long delayed, will not be denied any longer." The boy's shoulders eased. He did not smile. He simply breathed. The father's chains were released. The sound was soft, almost unnoticed, but echoed through every person who had witnessed this day. They walked out of the courtroom together, father and son, side by side. Saren followed behind them. Molly and the elderly man walked quietly, supporting one another. Chantara paused in the doorway, looking back one last time, not with regret, but with peace. Outside, the air was cool. The sky had cleared. The city moved as it always did, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding on the courthouse steps. The boy slipped his hand into his father's. The father looked down, eyes steady now, voice low. "You spoke for me when I had nothing left. I will spend the rest of my life deserving that." The boy nodded once. and together they stepped forward into a world that finally believed the truth.